Hi, I'm Yulia, and this is Red Lines, a show where we cross the boundaries of political talk and also dive into some very daring subjects. This week, we're going to be discussing why is it that the Western world continues their really, really strong inaction. And here I have today Anna from Ukraine, a woman from a fantastic YouTube channel that most of you probably know. But if you don't, I'm going to give Anna the mic so she can introduce herself.
Thank you so much, Julia, and it's a pleasure to be in your community. My name is Anna, and I'm from Ukraine. You know, when I first started my YouTube channel at the very beginning of the full-scale invasion, I did not think long about the way to name the channel, so it may seem primitive, but at the same time, I realized that perhaps the country you live in, the country you come from, is one of the best things to identify yourself. And right now, I have lots of friends from different corners of the world who, in comments, describe themselves as Eric from Norway, Jane from the US, and it actually tells a lot and returns us back, I don't know, maybe to medieval ages when people also describe themselves like that. Well, in my ordinary life, I am a cultural manager. I have an NGO that deals with cultural heritage preservation, popularization. Also, I'm a PhD in linguistics and have some courses at the university. And I write for the daily newspaper, The Day in Ukraine. But I think all of that is connected. This is telling things about the things that I consider important. And right now, I think it's our duty to explain Ukraine to the world. And I'm very grateful to you, Yulia, for doing that too. And I'm very grateful to all the people who want to know more and who want to help Ukraine win this war.
Yeah, it's very amazing. We were just talking behind the scenes how amazing it is that the community of Ukrainian supporters is so large and so big, yet so united. And it kind of has so many crisscrosses where people find each other and follow the same creators. And it truly, I think, is a community. And I really have never seen that on YouTube before, even though I watch quite a few YouTube channels, none of them connected to political crises anywhere. But, but it's a very, very, it's very inspiring to see this happening, and it's very inspiring to see so many people from different countries unite. But a very uninspiring situation, however, is the Western response to the recent events, particularly, I think. The deliberation of allowing us to strike Russia, which is something we've been talking about for the past month, like very continuously and quite sternly. And it seemed like there was progress. It seemed like Biden was going to come out a week from now and say, yes, sure, Ukraine can strike the Russian territory. And then Putin came out and said that if that were to happen, the West is going to enter the war with Russia, which what hasn't he been at war with Russia since hasn't Putin been at war with the Western world since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, according to his own words and his own propagandists? So I wonder why are we taking that as at face value?
You're right, and this is what bothers me greatly. First of all, having our YouTube communities, we can clearly see a big difference between the people of the country and the decision makers in that country.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
typically, people are much braver than those decision makers, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And the very idea of this escalation, that the concerns that many international organizations and governments express, seems to me has originated from the ideas of our Western supporters. And so, first of all, someone says, oh, this may lead to an escalation. Maybe that's the red line. We cannot cross it. And then Russian propaganda catches the idea and starts repeating it. What is like absurd, it never actually comes from Moscow first. So
It
it's
doesn't.
so like bad that people are looking for these excuses and introduce escalations when in reality we should take this leading part if we want to win the war. It's
Yeah.
impossible to win the war being a couple of steps behind Putin. And at the moment, the
Absolutely.
strategy is just to look at his next move and then react. And even these symptoms that Ukraine may be allowed to strike back came after Iran supplying Russia with ballistic missiles in just a blink of an eye. And look how effective, indeed, these authoritarian regimes are. One day you ask for ballistic missiles, the second day you have them already in your docks. That's insane. And the decision to potentially allow Ukraine strike back will come too late.
Yeah. It's unfortunately, when we say too late, I think it's very so you mentioned a couple of things that I wanted to sort of also piggyback off of. One is the idea of escalation. I heard another word today that I'm as allergic to now as escalation, and it's balance. And it was balance in negotiation with Russia, where of course Ukraine needs to come out on top. However, we need to find a negotiating balance to end this war. And I was like, wow, what in the escalation is this? But it was coming from Turkey, so it's not really that uncanny. But then you're right, because I think we are losing so much time. We're losing so many lives, but we're also kind of losing opportunity and momentum. And I think, when we talk about lives and we're talking about Ukraine and Ukraine's well being, a lot of the people that don't care about Ukraine don't see this as an argument, right? So, for instance, I think the bigger argument for those people is that the more we let Russia cross the boundaries, the more we let them step over the lines that we draw, the more we deliberate, the more Russia gets their stuff together, and the more effectively Russia can then invade and attack us and other countries. And while Russia doesn't have to be scared about the front lines in Ukraine striking, Ukraine taking back territory, they have all this time to spread their propaganda, install their leaders, sow political discourse and divide in all of these countries. So it's kind of like it's all interconnected. And I think we're all well, we are not, but the Western viewers in a lot of ways, shapes and forms, those that are not following Ukraine every day are forgetting that it's not just the battlefield, it's all of these things together. The less Russia has to worry about incursions and counteroffensives, the more time they have to dedicate to disinformation operations and disrupting your lives.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And there is one thought that I continuously repeat in my videos is that I don't mind if the world decides to stop supporting Ukraine, if the world decides to seriously defeat Russia. I hate another phrase. We're discussing these phrases that make us allergic. I hate the phrase Ukraine fatigue. And if there can be any kind of fatigue, it should be Russia fatigue. Because all of these problems, all of these difficult decisions that we have to make are Russia provoked, Russia organized. And I think it would be much easier to win this war and to return back to this new normal world, because the old one does not exist anymore, only if all of us agree that we need to defeat Russia. Stop thinking about supporting Ukraine. I hate happening in Ukraine. It's not happening in Ukraine. It's happening to Ukraine because Russia violates all international laws and agreements. So first of all, our focus should be not on supporting Ukraine, but on defeating Russia. And then we won't need your support anymore. We will continue building our imperfect but still good democracy. Another thing that you are very right in your observations, that Russia undermines global world order. The world is a complex place where there are lots of conflicts frozen in the borderlines, cultural, religious. We all know that, and many that we don't know, but they exist. And somehow we managed to live for quite a long period of time without world wars, because international agreements worked, because international law worked, because of NATO, SE, United Nations, and all of these organizations. Right now, step by step, Russia demonstrates that they do not work. United Nations. I loved one comment that I've read on Ukrainian Facebook saying that now it looks just like a place for quarrels, nothing else. No decisions, no consequences, just concerns and quarrels. It may be funny to watch for one day, but in times of this global crisis of security, it's pathetic. and how much money spent on that. OSCE, you know well that lots of Ukrainian soldiers hated when OSCE was visiting their positions because many OSCE members were actually Russians or Russia funded. And quite often these positions were targeted after the visit of the OSCE.
Yeah.
And lots of things about other institutions. And I am very grateful for the support that NATO countries provide. But at the same time, we see lots and lots and lots of Russian provocations when Russian missiles, Russian drones cross borders of NATO countries. And NATO countries say they do not stop these evil flying objects because they are afraid of escalation. How on earth is escalation possible when you shoot down Russian drone on a Polish territory?
Yeah. Or on, even if it's on approach to Polish territory, anything that it's kind of like, I've said this on my channel before as well. It's like, if there is a bullet going towards my building, I don't care if it's going to shoot into my apartment at the end or turn around. I'm going to take it down before it has a chance to. It makes no sense to not do that. I absolutely, I so agree with you on all of these points, because especially in the point of the OSCE, OSCE used to send Russian KGB FSB agents to to you. Same thing. Yeah, there is no difference. Formerly known as KGB, now known as the FSB, they used to send Russian FSB agents to the election. For the free and fair elections in Ukraine to check out polling sites and election sites. Mm-hmm. And that's so funny to me. They do that also in Europe. They do that in a lot of other countries because that's a normal policy. Every country can put forth their own candidate that can go and check out these polling stations and election sites mm-hmm. and stuff like that. And the OSCE trusts that the country checks if these people have criminal background, if they have any interests of their own, if they're biased. Yes, Russia, of course, is going to check if these people are biased or if they have any of their interests of their own. They legitimately send FSB.
You reminded me of my first job. I never said that on my channel. My first job when I was on the first course at the university was actually to translate for one OSCE team that came to control elections process in Ukraine. I'm not going to name what countries they were from, but like 2 members and a questionnaire. Mm-hmm. And you know what? I remember they have given me a questionnaire and told me, you know what to do. And they were doing their things, totally unrelated to the task. So this, I kind of liked it. I felt very serious. I was 17 at that time. Mm-hmm. But now I realize it's not the best approach to doing your job.
Yeah, not at all. Yeah. I mean, hey, it's not the best approach to doing free and fair elections when you send Russian KGB agents to the polling sites. But then the UN as well, I think the UN has become such a joke because it's supposed to be the United Nations against terror, right? Well, I mean, I put in terror there. That's not what's in the statute of the organization, but they're supposed to uphold the international order. But how can this organization uphold the international order if Russia, a country that's waging one of the largest wars, if not the largest war since World War II, is on the Security Council? But also there has been countless proof that Ukraine has provided that Russia occupies that seat illegally, because Russia had to apply for the seat and they just assumed the inheritance of the Soviet Union. However, that inheritance is not real, because if the Soviet Union didn't cease to exist as an entity but just succeeded itself into Russian Federation, that would have been a different thing. The Russian Federation was named as the successor of the Soviet Union, but the Soviet Union as an entity legally ceased to exist, and then the Russian Federation was formed after. It's not like one has flown into the other, right? So Russia doesn't have a seat on the Security Council at the UN. Russia took that seat illegally. And Ukraine and other countries have shown so much proof of that in the UN creation statute themselves. And they're just like, yeah, no, Russia is on the Security Council. Mm-hmm. How is that? it seems like Russia is making, in English, which is British English. I just hate calling it British because what is British English? Is it Welsh? Is it Scottish? Is it Irish?
Yeah.
But in English, there is this saying, to take a piss. And it
Mhm.
basically means sort of to make fun of something, right? So I feel like Russia is taking a piss at the world in terms of international law, because they don't abide it, and they show the world that international law doesn't matter only when
Mhm.
it comes to Russia.
Mhm. That is actually a message for those who don't care about Ukraine in particular, but have to understand that this is or will become the problems for that countries,
Yeah.
a problem for that countries too, because we all remember, for example, recent Putin's visit to Mongolia, which is a country that is a signature of the Rome Statute and is supposed to follow the orders of the International Criminal Court. And I think that Putin had no other reason to visit this country but to demonstrate to similar regimes like China, like maybe even North Korea or Iran, that, these international rules aren't working, they are broken. I think that's the only reason. They were looking for the country. They tried it with South Africa for BRICS summit, but
Mhm.
the president was not ready to invite Putin. He supports him, but seems like the legal power is not under the president's control in South Africa. In Mongolia, it's the country.
Yeah.
And that's why they organized this visit. And I hate the explanation that Mongolia provided, saying that we are energetically dependent on Russia, so we
Yeah.
could not. Come on, guys. Russia will have energy to sell after Putin is arrested. And you cannot imagine how quickly they will substitute him with someone else. So it's just like saying, we need money, so we won't arrest a serial killer. It's insane.
Yeah. Well, I think with them, it's also they're landlocked in between China and Russia, and so I'm not giving them any excuses. They should have, if they weren't planning on executing the international warrants, or if they were going to selectively execute them, they should not have signed the Rome Statute, because that's not how it works. You oblige yourself to arrest whoever it is that the international community has a warrant out for. So I absolutely agree with you there. I do think that they're very scared because they are in between Russia and China. And if one of them wanted to pressure them or invade them or do something, I don't even think the international community could help them, because how would you deliver weapons there? So I think they're kind of like they're between a rock and a hard place, where they really, really don't want to piss anyone off, because they're scared that they're going to be collateral damage. In this, at the same time, they should have just canceled his visit. Then they should have said the
Yeah,
same thing as South Africa
yeah,
did. But
yeah.
since you brought up the Mongolia visit, I wonder if you had seen Zigars, I don't know how to properly pronounce his last name in Russian, and I don't care to know, so it's Zigar, Mikhail Zigar. Have you seen his recent column in Der Spiegel?
Mm. No, I
Um,
didn't.
so, so he seems to believe, which is totally not a paid for Russian propaganda piece, that Putin went to Mongolia to get the shamans' approval to use nuclear weapons. Because because, and hear me out, some of the best shamans in the world are in Mongolia. And also, he recently visited Tuva. And I wish I was joking, but this is an actual piece for a German publication, right? For a very well respected
Yeah,
German
yeah, I know the
publication.
Spiegel, right?
Yeah. So Putin went to Tuva, where some of the biggest, best, I guess, shamans on the market of shamans are in Russia, and then Mongolia, where there are some other very, very important shamans in the shaman community. And Putin doesn't want to piss off the spirits, and
He
therefore,
pissed them off already.
and therefore he went to get the shaman's blessing to use nuclear weapons. And I love how at the end of this article, because of course he cannot spew all of this virtual garbage, right? And then say that he totally believes it. In the absolute last bit of the article, he said, well, these are rumors circulating in Moscow and I was not able to confirm them. But the whole article focused on Putin going to Mongolia to get the Shamans' approval for nuclear weapons. And I find it so funny because not only is this, it is so asinine that you can't even, I can't believe that publications are still publishing these Russian, they're not even fairy tales at this point. They're just like Russian acid dreams, right? That's one. And two, I can't believe how people don't see how these good Russians like Zygar are paid for propaganda, because so Russians are like, okay, so we threaten the West with the West being at war with Russia, and there are still major Western politicians advocating for letting Ukraine strike Russia. So that's not working. How can we scare them into submission? Oh my God, hear me out. We are going to say that Putin went to get the shaman's blessings for what? For the nukes. And it's like, how did you, have you seen Operation Infection?
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's crazy. But you actually, right now I'm reading the book of Peter Pomerantsev, No, It's Not Propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm loving the style. And there he actually provides a story from one Russian journalist who worked for this troll factory in Olhino.
Mm-hmm.
And before the start of the invasion, I think even
Mm-hmm.
before 2014, but she was this civil society activist, which is a very rare kind in Russia. And when she received the invitation, she decided to go there just to see how it works. And she also wanted to collect information, to make it public. And she even published articles later after she quit, but they did not receive the kind of attention she expected, which is a trouble in this world that stopped loving facts and wants this alternative truth. But she described different levels of people working on that troll factory, starting from very primitive, like bots, and finishing with creative people. And she was a creative person, and she said that her task was to provide like fortune telling, to write articles on behalf of some like witches, and spread political messages this way. And it seems like funny, but there is a serious like psychological background behind that. There are lots of people whose IQ is pretty low, and they love this fortune telling. They have super superstitious, and this is how they reach them with messages like the United States are bad. And she says it was really difficult because, for example, telling the stories from, I don't know, cursed woods, how do you switch to the United States? And she said that she invented stories like, by the way, I have a sister who lives for the long time in the USA, and she says the land is cursed because more and more of something happens. And this is how they work. They are super unpredictable, and they try to reach totally different categories of society. And sometimes this is a very vivid BS, and sometimes it can be very talently written, and just like not Ukraine won't be even mentioned, but the decisions that you will make based on the assumptions provided in the article will be bad for us or other democratic countries.
Well, we were just talking actually with Starsky the other day about different ways that Russia integrates their propaganda and how it's so invisible to like an untrained eye. But behind the scenes, we actually were discussing specific movies where this propaganda was mentioned in a way that you wouldn't even think, right? But so I don't know if you've watched The Crown. It was a very popular TV show about the royal family, and in one of the seasons, I don't remember whether it was 4 or 5. It was all about Diana and all about her marriage to Charles and how it was breaking down, right? And there is one scene that I personally just like almost spit my coffee on. I was watching it with coffee, and I vividly remember like having to clean things up because There was nothing about Ukraine, nothing about the Soviet Union, nothing up until that moment. And then Charles is driving in his car towards, I don't know, somewhere. And then there is this bit on the radio. The Soviet Union continues collapsing as Ukraine turns its back on Soviet leadership. And that's it. That is it. There is no mention of Ukraine before that. There is no mention of Ukraine after that. There is no plot line that involves Ukraine in that season whatsoever. Yes, sure, they talk about how it's a problem for the world order that the Soviet Union is collapsing for like 2 sentences 5 minutes later, but that bit looked basically like, oh my gosh, did you know Charles was cheating on Diana? And look at their rocky marriage. And oh my God, she was so unhappy. By the way, evil Ukraine turned its back on Soviet Union. Oh, and another thing, Diana has bulimia. It was literally like, what was that for? I guarantee you, someone in the writing. Oh,
Sorry.
no worries.
That's to make a video more interesting.
Yeah. But yes, what I was trying, that happens to me all the time, don't worry. But what I was saying is, like, I guarantee you someone in that writing room was Russian, and they just added that, and people thought it was like a quirky little bit to just add on the radio to show what time it was. But in reality, you didn't have to add that on the radio,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Plus, people who know very little about this part of the world will definitely look at it just like something evil is happening. And what is really bad about Russian propaganda, actually, that it has this really long history. Typically, evil military or political propaganda exists for a very like short period of time, like 10 years, like 5 years, and then regime collapses and it disappears. And Russia keeps repeating similar messages for centuries. And that's why, unfortunately, we already have generations of people in different parts of the world who believe it is the truth because that's what their parents knew, that's what their great parents knew. And, you know, working on this documentary, Big Russian Lies, that will be dubbed in English, we analyzed even the works of Leo Tolstoy, and lots of researchers provide why this book is also dangerous, like to build your worldview on War and Peace, because there, after Germany, like on the border of Germany, Prussia, Russia starts. With no Poland, with no Czech Republic, with no other cultures, no. And many people who read these books, who don't care about Googling, looking at the maps, start thinking that, well, it's just Russia. And you know, when I have just began recording videos, one of like my viewers gave me an advice: please keep it simple, because for many of us, your country was just a rebellious part of Russia. And it may not sound very pleasant, but this is true. And I think, once again, I'm not angry or disappointed with these people. I realize like lots of mistakes made, including by us. And it's actually good that people rediscover Ukraine. And that's why my editor-in-chief in the day newspaper gave a very good like quote that I often repeat, that Ukraine is the greatest geographical discovery of the 21st century. It's true.
Yeah, Ukraine is it definitely is, you know, as someone, and I've repeated this I think so many times in my lives. I don't know if I've ever said this on this channel, but when I first moved to the United States in I believe 2011 or something, in 2015, and I remember this because I ended up dating this guy for a very long time, and that is an error in my judgment. But I went on a date and the guy asked me, "Oh, you're from Ukraine. So what do you speak then? Ukrainese?" And I think maybe I was just happy that he didn't ask if I spoke Russian. but, you know, the fact is that Ukraine was just so absolutely unknown to people that I could have spoken Ukrainese for all he cared.
Yeah. One of my subscribers who moved to Canada from Slovakia shared her story. And she said that when she came to Canada in the 80s or else approximately that period, they've asked her, so are you like from Soviet Union or Soviet related culture, like communist bloc? Do you speak Soviet? And he was just do you speak Soviet? So
Oh,
that
yes.
is one of the top questions, you know.
Oh, yes, I do. I speak Soviet very well. I don't have
But
an address. I don't have a street. I just live in Soviet Union.
yeah, but you know, the like I'm a linguist by profession. I have some researches in linguistics, and I started thinking about this phrase, and it actually
Yeah.
has something behind it. If we do not focus on the language and we focus
Yeah.
on this style, on this like Orwellian approach to language, then perhaps
Yeah.
there is definitely a way to speak Soviet.
Oh, there is 100% a way to speak Soviet. It's like, when we say that the West doesn't understand Russia because Russia is like, to me personally, the Russian Empire never really collapsed. It lost some territory and renamed itself Soviet Union. Then it lost some territory and renamed itself the Russian Federation. So the Soviet tactics, the imperial tactics, they're all with modern Russia. So I feel like when we say that the West doesn't understand Russia, it's because the West doesn't speak Soviet. They don't
Yeah,
speak the
and
Soviet mentality.
unfortunately, we do.
Yeah, we so do. It's sort of like, I was really laughing so hard when there were so many channels popping up in the beginning of the full scale invasion, and they kind of, I mean, they've now dispersed for obvious reasons, but a former US Marines, and I don't mean people with actual experience, I mean someone who had just at some point served in the American army and understands how like the army, well, not the army, the military is built, what sort of chains of commands there are, how like the orders are being passed. And they were trying to explain this war, and they were trying to explain how there is no way that Russian military is as bad as we in Ukraine are trying to paint it, how this is just some sort of an obscene situation and they don't understand what's happening. And it was so funny to me because I was like, sir, you served in a NATO military where you had air support, where you had nice fancy hospitals, you had helicopter evac, you had people with chains of commands. Um, I would show people the TV series Soldate to explain how bad the Russian military actually is, because in Soldate, it was actually a piece of internal Russian propaganda that was supposed to make people want to serve in the Russian military. So Soldate actually paints a better picture of the Russian military than it actually was. And I was finding it so funny that these guys from the United States with the experience in American military were trying to explain to Americans how the Russian military works, because I was like, you don't speak Russian
So
military.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Uh, Unfortunately, please hear us, people. There are
Mhm.
some things that you can know only after experiencing them.
Yeah.
Some things are unexplainable, starting from what life in post Soviet Ukraine was, for example, and finishing with Russian attitude towards Ukraine. You know,
Yeah.
when they speak about one of these common narratives that Russia brought to many Western media is that this war was provoked by evil United States and so on. Uh, we know there are more than 300 years of wars between the Russian Empire and Ukraine. For example, my grandmother comes from a very beautiful Ukrainian city, Baturin, which was a
Mhm.
capital of
Oh,
Hetman Mazepa. And I remember visiting it once before the start of the full scale invasion. And Baturin has a museum where they have collected lots of evidence of another Russian war crime that took place in Baturin in 1708 or 1709. When the army of Tsar Peter, I'm not going to say the Great because he's not great at all,
oh my
burned
God.
Baturin, killing women and children who were there because Cossacks were in a different place, returning back from a fight. And this is similar to what Russians did in Bucha or Mariupol. And it
Yeah.
happened 300 years ago, when you know
Yeah.
really well the United States were still shaping, and they were too
Yeah.
busy to interfere into Ukrainian internal politics. So that's absurd. And so many people keep repeating this, even to us, like we are
Mm.
stupid and we don't know it. We know our history. We have like victims of Russia in every family at a particular generation. Our grandparents were hiding food, and in Ukraine, you still never throw away bread.
Yeah.
Uh, we don't do it. We feed it to pigeons, to
Yeah.
sparrows, or whatever, but we don't throw it. Why? Not because we love bread that much or we are so good, but because of that trauma that we inherited. We don't ask questions. We were brought up that way.
Yeah, I actually only found out that it's completely normal to throw out moldy bread or bread in general only when I moved to the United States, and my boyfriend at
Mm.
the time went to throw out some stuff in my fridge and the pantry that spoiled, and he went to throw out bread, and I was like, "What are you doing?" And he was like, "What do you mean? What am I doing? It's moldy bread. I'm throwing it out." And I'm like, "You are not allowed to throw out bread. You have to put it on my windowsill outside of my window, and pigeons are gonna eat it." You should have seen his face when I said that. He was like, pigeon, you want pigeons on your windowsill.
Yeah.
I was like, well, I don't want them there, but they need to eat the bread because the bread can't go into the trash. but
Yeah, I
but
have a similar story, which is actually beautiful and demonstrates support and understanding from the American people. Once we
mm,
had a Peace Corps volunteer.
mhm,
She came from the US, and she had this training in Chernihiv where they learned the
mhm,
language and so on. And she lived in a Ukrainian family. And she later shared the story at the university. She was a vegetarian, and she said
mhm,
that this family kept giving me sandwiches, with some meat also, because they felt like, oh, you should eat meat, how can you, and so on. And later she also learned that you cannot throw away bread. They did not do it in the
yeah,
family, and she knew because of Holodomor, because of this
mhm,
trauma of famine and so on. And she said, like, when they would give me the sandwich, I cannot eat it and I cannot throw it, so I
mhm.
threw away meat to some dogs or else, and I had to eat the bread myself.
But that's so sweet because it's like the understanding of someone's culture. Um,
Values, yeah.
I
Mhm.
also wanted to, when you said I will not call him the great because he wasn't great, I remembered something because on one of my live streams on my own channel, I always say this whenever Peter the second, sorry, yes, Peter the second comes up, because it's Catherine the second, Peter the first, Peter the first. Whenever Peter
Yeah.
the first comes up, yeah,
It's actually good that we already forget about their names and
I
numbers.
I know. I'm at this point, I'm just so, I keep kicking myself because I'm an avid lover of history and I really love geopolitics. And that's something that I used to geek out on. Like the reason I know all of this stuff is because I just loved history and geopolitics starting like when I started learning it in school. But so I kick myself for forgetting these things sometimes or getting confused. And then I'm like, you know what? It's Russia. I don't care. And then, but I never say Peter the Great. And I always say it in the same way as you do, where I say, I'm not Peter, I'm not going to call him the Great, the first, because he was awful. And I remember on one of my live streams, someone had asked me if I know you, and I didn't put it together then. And then you said it. And I was like, why would you randomly bring up? I'm like, yes, I know the channel, but what about it? So I thought it was very funny that was the parallel that they drew because they probably thought that maybe, yeah,
Yeah,
it was like
and this also proves that this is a typical Ukrainian attitude.
mm-hmm,
Without
yeah,
knowing each other's approach, we were
yeah,
explaining the things in a similar way. It's just like a type of what
mm-hmm,
Russian Empire and then Soviet Union was spreading. In my city, we have a house that had this table on it, that it was visited by Peter the First.
mm-hmm,
When in reality, it's not very likely. Just once he traveled to Poland, so hypothetically, he could have stopped, and like every person in the city knew that this is Tsar Peter's house. Why? Because that's a part of the Russian Empire myth. That's the way they mark their space, by
Mm-hmm.
saying that is the Pushkin Street, that is Tsar Peter's house, and it is all
Mm-hmm.
still Russian Empire.
Yeah, they do that. I also wanted to backtrack a little bit because you said something very important there, and it was oh my gosh, I I just had the thought and then I looked away and I completely forget what I was about to say, but you were talking about oh my gosh, I need to, you know how you like forget something and you need to walk back into that room, and I don't understand how it just
Should I
completely
drop my camera again just to
it was way after you dropped your camera, so it wouldn't be helpful. It might kill your camera though. But it was something about it was before Peter. I got distracted by the Peter the first comment, and then I forgot what I
yeah.
originally wanted to say. So I guess if it comes back to me, I will say it.
We were talking about this US interference, that we had troubles with Russia for centuries and
Oh,
we know it
thank
better.
you. Thank you. Yes. So this narrative that it's a proxy war and that that it's a NATO's war against Russia using Ukrainian people implies that Ukrainian people are stupid. And because
Mhm.
Ukraine hasn't been, that's the thing. It's like we know better. Like the same as I hear in a lot of, in the US, a lot of the times when I say, hey, Russians normally absolutely despise Ukrainians and look at us like we're inferior, people will be like, oh, I've never heard a Russian say that. They don't say it. It's just how you feel when they talk to you and when they find out you're from Ukraine. They talk to you a very different way. They look down on you. Suddenly, you're that Ukrainian, and you can't see that unless you're Ukrainian. It's very similar to sort of to how racism is experienced. A white person cannot tell a person of color that, oh, they don't think that person was racist or they don't think that group of people is racist because they didn't see any racism. It's sort of like there are microaggressions and there are things that you will not that you will not pinpoint or even see if you are not the person on the receiving end. And so that's one thing. And the other thing that I said before, that this kind of notion that Ukrainians don't know they're being used, it's by design of Russia as well, because we were painted as this like sort of small nation that doesn't have education, third world, we're like this kind of, pardon my French, shithole. But in reality, Ukraine is one of the most educated nations in Europe. Ukraine has some of the largest numbers of people with PhDs. Most of our people yeah, most of our people have, like, I have a bachelor's degree in America, right, and I have two, but the funny thing is that people here are usually like, oh, just bachelor's. And I'm like, yes, I'm so sorry, I just have two bachelor's degrees. Because here it's very normal for people to have a master's. It's very normal for people to have, well, not normal, but a lot of people go ahead and get a PhD. It's a very educated country. And someone coming from Ukraine going into an American college, I was honestly surprised at how lax and how lacking the first 2 years of my education were, because we were learning things that I had already learned in seventh grade, because you're supposed to be well rounded and take, like bio and chemistry and art and music in college. But the thing is, I already did that in middle school and in high school. And this well roundedness already kind of came from there, because when you go to college, you now study things that you're supposed to study for your profession. So
Mhm.
it's this myth that Ukrainians are not educated enough or not smart enough or don't know what's happening to them. Ukrainians are very politically aware. Ukrainians are very politically active, and most of our people know exactly what's happening. There are some quite remote from knowledge and understanding people. There are, of course, some people who are traitors, but it's this very, very dangerous and very well crafted by Russia narrative that we just don't know that the US is using us, because, of course, Ukrainians don't know. Like, we're just stupid. We're just Russia's little brother. We just don't know that we're being used.
Yeah, and that's why it is so important for more people to speak on various platforms about that and to show this Ukrainian attitude. One of the weirdest and quite at the same time popular comments that I receive whenever we meet
Mm-hmm.
someone in Ukraine or organize something and people come here even in times of war, they say, wow, you're so normal. Wow, you're just like us. Wow, you know, I don't know, different kinds of wines, or you've been to so many countries. You're just like us, or you're so like. I'm sorry, we're still in this part of the world. You're so European. Uh, and of course, it may sound offensive, but I've got used to that. And I realize that people do not intend to offend you and they are actually changing their attitude. So that's a beautiful moment. But at the
Yeah.
same time, it's the consequence of, first of all, Russian domination in the media sphere. And
Mhm.
second, perhaps partially our laziness during this 30 years of renewed independence,
Yeah.
when we thought we still have time ahead. Uh, and But we're changing that, and I'm very grateful once again for the communities of our channels that they come here and they want to
Hmm.
learn more and they discover Ukraine, and they see how different we are. And personally, I think, speaking in this like geographical terms, there is a huge this geographical tectonic divide between Ukraine and the rest of like Western, or let's not repeat Russian propaganda, I mean democracy, freedom loving nations, and
Hmm.
this very Eastern, very authoritarian
Yeah.
nations.
Yeah, for sure. There is a huge divide. And it's also, well, Russia painted us as a very kind of like backwards, very, very dictatorial. That's where the propaganda from like, oh, Ukraine is so corrupt, Ukraine is so this, Ukraine is so that, because they want to paint us as an authoritarian regime. But in reality, most of the post Soviet satellite spaces are a lot more corrupt than Ukraine is. A lot more corrupt.
And
And one thing that we have that they don't seem to have is that the way you get out of corruption is when the people in the country are not okay with it. In a lot of post-Soviet satellite countries, people want the corruption to keep happening because it's easier to live that way. You kind of make a couple of $1,000s, then you go and pay off someone and bribe them, and they put you in a position of better power somewhere, and that's how you kind of go about your life. You do something wrong, you pay them off, you avoid the law, and you keep making money, and the money goes to you, and you don't care to pay taxes, you don't care for the money to go into your country because you don't care if your kids have a park to play in. You're going to build a park in your mansion. But in Ukraine, people are not having it. People don't have this selfish mentality. We have a lot more people who have collective mentality in terms of like, a collective wellness mentality, where people want the parks to be built, where they want the roads to be good, where they want the roads to be lit, where they want their kids to be able to ride a bike at 10 p.m. and not be scared. And that's why we sort of like, when we see corruption, see something, say something. In other countries, see something, now you know how it's done.
right, that is a very correct observation, and I often try to like persuade people that one of the best things that will definitely help Ukraine deal with corruption that is present in every country of the world,
Mhm.
including the European Union or the US, that we have a very active civil society. You've seen that during the Orange Revolution, the Revolution of Dignity, and people care
Mhm.
about the streets, the schools, and another argument, I don't remember who told me about it, but that was definitely a person from outside Ukraine. And he said, whenever I come to Ukraine, I open a newspaper and I read about different corruption cases. That one is prosecuted, that one, a trial on someone, that one is fired. And you
But
never
that's
find
good
something. Yes, that's actually
because
good. And
we
that
are,
is what
yeah.
proves that the country fights corruption, something you will never read in Belarus or Russian
Yeah.
newspapers. And this is a healthy process. And
Hmm.
many actually corruption mechanisms were brought with this communist society, and we are
Yeah.
fighting that. And Ukrainian
Yeah.
society protests against that. So, is corruption present? Yes, but it's also
Hmm.
present in Germany and in France. Are we fighting against this? Yes, just as they do in France and in Germany. Give us some more tools, teach
Hmm.
more of our civil society activists, provide more training programs. People love it in Ukraine,
Hmm.
but we are on this healthy way. And in Russia style societies, no, they enjoy it.
Yeah. They enjoy it and they perpetuate it. And yeah, I think one of the biggest strength of Ukraine is that is its people. And I think one of the reasons why we've made headlines in the beginning of the full-scale invasion so much, and why so many people were identifying with us and feeling for us and sort of like respecting us so much, is because our society is very together. And I mean, like, you know, it's a very dumb word, but it's like we come together for common goals. But we don't see that in modern world. You know, we don't see society sort of like dropping everything that they've been doing to go and fight a common fight, whether it be, you know, a physical fight as we're experiencing right now, or whether it be what Maidan started as, right? Or what 2014 started as. It's sort of like we support each other. I think one of the biggest examples I always give people to show why Ukraine is worth fighting for and why it's so much different than Russia is because in Russia, there is a policeman and they hit someone, and everyone else sees that that person is hit and they don't want to get hurt. They run away. In Ukraine, someone gets hit, 100,000 more people come out to protect that person because no, you cannot do that. And it's like this will to stand up for our own people. And by our own people, I don't mean you have a Ukrainian citizenship. I mean, you are a Ukrainian who respects Ukrainian values and wants this country to be better. And I think that that's a very good seg into a summary of today's discussion. And I think that one of the things that hurts us the most as Ukrainians is that it's not even that we want the West to fight for us. It's not that we want the West to give us weapons so we win, right? It's like, and it's not that we are so egotistic that we think we are protecting the whole world, but we know what threat Russia is, and we don't want anyone else to experience it in the future. And we know that you can if you don't let us deal with it. So we want to deal with it for you so you don't have to be in our position, which is something that Ukrainians always seem to do historically, is protect neighbors and protect other nations that can be harmed. So it's so absolutely hurtful and upsetting to constantly have to fight for the right to fight for you to not have to fight.
Yeah, I was the one who was also experiencing what my friends, subscribers call normalcy bias. When even in times of war, because it started in 2014
Yeah.
with the annexation of Crimea and weak reaction of the world.
Mm-hmm.
But before the full-scale invasion, I was the one choosing the articles and the analytics which claimed, no, it's impossible. Like full-scale war in the 21st century with aviation, no, never.
Yeah.
And then it happened. And it sobers you really, really quickly. And I've realized that most of my arguments were based like it's illogical, it's irrational to attack Ukraine. It will not give anything to Russia. But I have forgotten one of the main things about Russia that many of our other friends do not think about. Russia is irrational. Russia is crazy. And it will do the things that your governments, your people would never do. Just have a look at what they are doing here. And my greatest desire, perhaps, is to switch this attention from helping Ukraine or even investing in Ukraine's victory, or what I don't like, helping us as long as it takes. I would like all the same people, all the international organizations and governments to realize we have this totally criminal terrorist behavior. We have to punish it. We have to defeat Russia. We have to imprison Putin. And then we will have decades of de-zombifying Russian population. And no, Russian population will not build a democracy without our very active help, because they have never experienced that. Because there is something inherently wrong with this land, as for centuries they produce dictators and tyrants. But stop thinking that Putin is a leader with whom we can speak. It's just like talking to a serial killer who promised he will stop, and you say, okay, let's not imprison him because this can lead to escalation. He will start killing people in a prison. It doesn't work like that. Having seen war crimes in Mariupol, in Bucha, in Irpin, the destruction of Kakhovka Dam, hijacking of Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, recent strike on Ukrainian Children's Cancer Hospital. After all that, can you sign any agreements, give any new territories, or believe something they will promise? No, just trust us. We are Ukrainians, and we know that personally and from the history of our land.
I think it's Putin is the product of Russia, not the other way around. Russia is not the product of Putin. And I guess the best conclusion out of this is that if you don't want to help Ukraine, don't. But help defeat Russia, because Ukraine is not a threat to you. Russia, however, is. And tanks don't have to be rolling through your cities for Russia to have invaded you.
Mm-hmm.
We see that with Trump. We see that with Orban. We see that with a lot of other scenarios. Don't let it happen to your country. Thank you, Anna, for joining me today. And thank you so much for this amazing conversation. I honestly thoroughly enjoyed it. And I really hope that you will come back and we'll have some more conversations in the future.
So am I. Thank you so much. It was very nice to talk to you and to all the beautiful people who watch and support us.
Thank you so much. Don't forget to sign up to Anna's channel if you don't follow her yet. It's going to be in the description of this video. And I hope that we'll see her again. And I'm sure you will hope that we'll see her again. So see you next time, Anna. And thank you.
Thank you.
Anyways, if you like this segment, please do all of the things I've asked you to do before that. And also don't forget to subscribe to the Gays and UA TV English. And I will see you next time.